Hello, my name is Seth Rainey. Today I'm going to be talking to you about blockades and blockading and how to frustrate them as well. Basically what a blockade is a group of warships keeping out merchant ships and supplies from reinforcing your opponent. There are three different types of blockades that we'll talk about today. There's the shore blockade, which is as close as you can get, which also requires the least amount of ships. You're right there. They are not going to be able to get by you very easily, but it makes it much harder to resupply your own forces. There's the medium blockade, which is your typical blockade, which puts you just out of range of enemy shore battery. The net is a bit wider, so more ships can slip in and out. Then there's the horizon blockade. The horizon blockade is as far back as you can go. In fact, you're slightly out of sight of the horizon. The enemy doesn't know where you are, and it requires a massive amount of ships to effectively seal off the port. By using natural features, though, such as mud flats, salt flats, shallow water, or doldrums or something else like that, your blockading force can help limit the amount of ships needed in that specific area. By anchoring one of your flanks on a mud flat, you're not going to have to worry about other ships getting by them. They're just not going to be able to get the depth to do it. Resupplying your blockade is one of the biggest problems you have to come up against. You have to make sure that you have enough food, enough water. You're not going to be able to put into shore in the enemy's area because they'll be able to chase you off. So you have to have supply ships constantly running back and forth through your blockade. By contrast, one of the things you can do to frustrate a blockade is laying mines. By laying mines and mining certain areas of the ocean around your port cities, you're able to deny access to that space of the water. A mine is a large circular object with contact points on them, and when a ship hits those contact points, the ship explosion will go off, causing a massive amount of underwater bubbles that will lift the ship up out of the water and then drop it back down, breaking the spine of the ship. These are very deadly weapons to ships and something that need to be avoided at all costs. In fact, special ships called minesweepers will actually go in and remove the mines for other ships to go in. Now, the problem is with that is it's incredibly frustrating. It takes a lot of time and a lot of resources to do this. The next thing that you can do to help frustrate a blockade is using your shore battery and artillery fire to use as a curtain for supply ships trying to run the blockade. By providing them with covering fire, they're able to steam through as quickly as they can, trying to make their way through the blockading force and back to your port city. And they would be delivering such things as medical supplies, weapons, possibly reinforcements, or anything else like that. Now, the problem with that, though, is they're only going to be able to bring in the limited supplies, which leads me to blockade runners. It's effectively military smuggling. Lots of small-time projects going on, very fast, agile ships with small cargoes bringing in only the necessities and messages going in and out that need to go. Pulling into secluded harbors, deep water ports, or even shallow water in some cases, using flat-bottom barges, you're able to get to places that the enemy's big warships are not able to go. You'd, as I said, be bringing in medical supplies and weapons and such as that. Now, in modern-day warfare, a blockade can be used effectively against a country. We've done it before. The last large-scale blockade that we've seen was in World War II. We used a combination of ship and air power to blockade certain cities in Europe, cutting off supplies to them. The Air Force cutting off the land routes and the ships cutting off the sea routes, which would literally just starve the enemy into submission. Modern-day blockades are a little more tricky. With all our modern-day technology, we're able to shoot a missile off a ship and shoot it halfway around the world. We don't need to be necessarily within sight of our opponent to strike them. But shipping that goes in and out of our opponent's country, ISIS, for example, shipping oil out, ships it in big tankers. Now, these tankers operate with a supposed license to transport this illegal oil. We would need ships that were there and able to check them for their illegal contraband and destroy them or be able to take them if need be, which would require combat ships, something that we haven't used in a long time. It would require us to revamp our Navy. By denying, as I said, ISIS, for example, oil, we're denying them a major money benefit that they need to continue operating the way they do. Without this cash flow, they'd have to try to transport this oil over land. You're not able to transport as much of it as you want, and you're definitely not able to transport it as easily. On top of that, it also leaves it open for somebody to take it as well. If it tries to leave the country, say through Turkey, Turkey has a very good reason to take it. So without the seaports, the oil isn't as easily transported. Blockading is not so much about large-scale naval battles, land battles, or battles at all. It's about patience. The ability to do a blockade really requires waiting. We see during the American Civil War, the Anaconda Plan was put into effect. What they asked to do was the Northern Navy would be to surround the southern states with a horizon blockade and try to stop any ships from coming in or out of the ports that were there. This would be denying the English the valuable cotton that they needed, but in return would also stop the Confederates from gaining that English money and possibly support. It made England look for cotton elsewhere. And because they had to look for cotton elsewhere, the South's cotton is king policy failed. It was a long, slow process. If you read through the accounts, a lot of boredom took place. Fighting on ships, the ships were sometimes recruiting people that weren't necessarily the best, but they would stay there. And for the South, it was a waiting game as well, for while the blockading force was sitting there cutting off all their supplies, they had to make do with what they could. For example, they talk a lot about missing coffee. Without those trade lanes open, they couldn't import coffee. They had to make coffee out of chicory. Medicine was another very big thing. They had to make do with homegrown herbs and such as that for all sorts of diseases and everything, which just really hurt the economy. Weapons, everything from day-to-day items that they could not make themselves because they didn't have the industrial base had to be shipped in, and due to this blockade, it couldn't be, so they had to make do with what they had. That's about it. Blockades are all about being patient. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.